We're going to start tonight's meeting. So once again, thank you all for coming tonight. And this was kind of fun. We put it out to the members and members of the community as to what you would want tonight's topic to be. We had about 5 different topics to choose from. I had a feeling this one was going to be the winner tonight. So yes, we're really excited to be taking something that I've done, and I have walked the streets, and I've presented this a number of times. And tonight I get to virtually walk through the downtown of Oshawa with you folks. So we have been offering this version of the downtown walking tour since 2014. And through the years, like I said, we've walked these streets with hundreds of guests, asking questions and sharing stories along the way. Tonight, we will follow the path of the walking tour, and we will be talking about different points of interest along the way. This is a photograph-based presentation, so we're using historic images from the archives, which is not something we get to do in an actual downtown walking tour. I get to say, this is what it used to look like. So it's kind of cool that I get to actually show what it used to look like. We're going to be using these historic images, photos of the downtown today, as well as photos that have been taken during past downtown walking tours. So to start, we acknowledge that the route that we follow is located on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island, the Iroquoian-speaking Wendat, and the 1923 Williams Treaties First Nations. The first settler of European descent in this area, which became known as the village of Oshawa, was John Carr, and he purchased 200 acres at the northwest corner of King and Simcoe Streets in 1816. And I'm going to be saying King and Simcoe, King and Simcoe, King and Simcoe so many times this evening. Just you folks wait. For many years, because John Carr was the first settler of European descent, this settlement became known as Carr's Creek. In the 1830s, there was a local merchant named Edward Skay, and he opened up a popular general store at the corner of Simcoe and King. And soon, because his general store was so well known, people started referring to the area as Skay's Corners. In 1842, Skay made an application to the legislature for a post office. John Hilliard Cameron, who was our representative as part of the Home District in Parliament, he replied saying, sure, you can have a post office, no problem, but you need to choose a name other than Corners, because there were far too many communities popping up that were such and such corners. So you can have a post office, just choose a name that doesn't have corners. The name Oshawa was chosen to represent the settlement, and it translates from the indigenous dialect to mean, quote, that point at the crossing of the stream where the canoe was exchanged for the trail, end quote. In 1850, Oshawa was declared a village. The settlement, as you can imagine, continued to grow. And in 1879, we were declared a town with a population of 4,000. In 1922, the Ontario Municipal Board approved the annexation of Cedardale, so essentially what was along Simcoe Street south to Bloor, and it provided the city with frontage along Lake Ontario. With this all of a sudden population boost, it gave us enough population to be known as a city, and on March 8, 1924, we were declared a city in Ontario. If we were doing the walking tour, we would be in Oshawa Civic Center. That's our first stop. It's where we ask all of our participants to meet. That's where we do our head counts. We're right in that heart of the Civic Center of Oshawa. And here there are 3 big points of interest: City Hall, the Robert McLaughlin Gallery, and the McLaughlin branch of the Oshawa Library. Let's first talk about the municipal offices. The first recorded village council was held at Munro's Hotel, which was located, you guessed it, around King and Simcoe Streets, which is around where CIBC is currently standing. In 1847, a building at Centre and Athol Streets was used as the town hall. And in 1877, the Joseph Hall Works building, where the police station currently is today, it was purchased, and it had 3 functions: town hall, police station, and fire hall. It featured a tall tower with a 1-ton fire bell, and this building was demolished in 1953. You can see the postcard on the right-hand side, which shows that very first town hall, which really makes identifying downtown photos really simple. If you can see that tower, you know whereabouts on Simcoe Street you are located. The present-day City Hall building was commissioned in 1954. The land that City Hall was built on had been the site of the Christian Church, the congregation that Thomas Henry of Henry House helped to establish. And I love this description in a commemorative booklet from the official opening. Quote, "The electronic, automatically operated elevator serves all floors, from the lowest level to the council chambers on the top floor. From here, a commanding view is obtained of the entire city, and this will provide inspiration to the civic leaders as they give leadership to this thriving new city." End quote. The tower, which you can see in the top left and on the right, was constructed in 1970, and it's known as the Rundle Tower. City Hall, as we all know, went through further revitalization in the late 2000s, with the renovations completed in 2010, and that is the building that you can see in the lower right image. A little bit about the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. It bears the name of the family's patriarch, Robert McLaughlin. It was founded in 1867, although almost 20 years later, the gallery outgrew its space. In 1987, the gallery was redesigned by architect Arthur Erickson and reopened to the public. The Robert McLaughlin Gallery, and this is from their website, is dedicated to sharing, exploring, and engaging with our communities through the continuing story of modern and contemporary Canadian art, and a highlight of the collection is the Thomas Boakley collection. This is comprised of nearly 3,000 historical photographs of Oshawa and Durham region. The gallery also has the largest collection of materials from the Painters 11, which was a group founded in 1953 with its origins here in the Oshawa-Whitby area. Now, if you have ever wandered around the RMG, you can't miss the public art in the area. There are 5 sculptures around the exterior of the gallery, giving the public an opportunity to experience art both inside and outside of the gallery walls. And I'm going to quickly touch on 2 of them. On the left, first let's talk about the one on the right. The RMG approached Douglas Copeland, a Canadian novelist and visual artist, in the spring of 2010 with the idea of commissioning a major outdoor sculpture. The approximately 27 feet by 11 feet relief sculpture is entitled Group Portrait 1957, and it was permanently installed on the northwest facade of the RMG in September 2011. And it's called Group Portrait, and he was inspired, and all of those circles, they correspond to a photograph of the Painters 11. So it really, this piece is tied back to one of their core collections being Painters 11. The sculpture, which you can see on the left, in the spring of 2012, the RMG was offered a monumental sculpture by Australian-American artist Clement Meadmore as an extended loan to gift from the Toronto collectors Edward and Marla Schwartz. The sculpture is called Upstart 2, and it is a 25-foot, 6-inch high aluminum sculpture, and it was created by this artist in 1987. The sculpture is installed in the Civic Center Gardens directly across from the gallery. And if you want any information about the RMG's public art collections, it can be found either on their website or visiting this institution. That's also something that I'm quite big on during these presentations. I really do like to promote and talk about our partners in the area. So usually my spiel is go on the walking tour and then go see some art. I'm not quite sure their status. I believe their doors are open, but please don't quote me on that. Any of these institutions, if I do say, please go visit, please go support, I'm going to also include a little caveat of please contact them beforehand. And finally, the Oshawa Public Library. So we can actually see information, and we can see the history of the Oshawa Public Library going back to the 1860s, when a Mechanics Institute first opened up in 1864. There was a very modest admission fee, but that got you into the lending library, and I believe they hosted lectures as well. However, after some time, the Mechanics Institute closed their doors. Shortly afterwards, I believe this was sometime around the turn of the century, Oshawa had a first branch of the Oshawa Library as we know it today opened up as a Carnegie Library. So in communities all across North America, you will see what is called a Carnegie Library. And all of these libraries were built through the philanthropy of the American tycoon, Andrew Carnegie. They're all quite iconic. And if you want to see one that's still standing in our area, I would recommend going to downtown Whitby, where the law firm, I can't remember the exact law firm, Elliott and Flaherty's old law firm. I know that the name has changed through the years, so my apologies for not remembering. But their law offices are located in Whitby's former Carnegie Library. The current library that we see today was opened up in the 1950s, and it bears the name of another McLaughlin, this one being Colonel Sam R.S. McLaughlin. And today the library has grown to over 4 branches. So the Northview branch opened, followed by the Just Han, and now there's also a branch up at the Delve Park Community Center. Also in the area, so it's usually at this point that we start our walk to the next spot, and I point out points of interest also in the area. So there is the church on the east side of Center Street. This is the St. George Anglican Church, built in 1924. Center Street for a while was known as Church Street because of the sheer amount of churches that were located along it. So the picture on the two right-hand photos are of St. George's. The bell in front of City Hall came from the Center Street United Church, which, as I said earlier, was Thomas Henry's church. This was demolished in 1967 to make way for the Rundle Tower. And finally, the center-left image is of Cowan House, and it was built circa 1858, and it was the home to Mayor W.F. Cowan, hence why we call it Cowan House. It was transferred to the St. George Anglican Church for use as a rectory in 1923. So our next stop is directly across from the Oshawa House. It was an inn and tavern located on the northwest corner of King and Center Streets, and the building remains on this site to this day. The Oshawa House was constructed sometime around 1838 in the Italianate architectural style. It was described in 1844 as being the best tavern between Toronto and Kingston. It was multi-purpose, including a large meeting hall, hotel, and tavern. And as you can see in the one image, the original brick building was red brick, and it had Oshawa House spelled out on the facade. There was a book called The Oshawa Manchester of Canada, published in 1898, and it described the Oshawa House Hotel, noting its 40 well-furnished bedrooms, and it was well lit throughout with electricity. Something that we would take for granted today. Of course the hotel you're going to has electricity, but it was quite novel back in 1898. At this time, the rate for a room was $1, but a special rate could be arranged by the week. By the 1920s, the hotel gradually declined and the Oshawa House was converted to apartments with stores on the street level. Today, the Oshawa House continues to serve a variety of tenants, and I believe the image that we have, which is our quote-unquote current image on the bottom, is quite outdated as that tenant has changed quite a bit, and I believe they're now operating as the Oshawa House Cafe. So the one image is from around the turn of the century. The top right image, I believe, is from about the 1970s, and then of course I think the bottom one was taken in 2015. So it gives you just kind of an idea. You can see not much about this building has changed through the years. A little bit of paint, tenants have changed, but otherwise the building still remains the same. Also in the area, I meant to throw in a picture of the Michael Starr building, so my apologies for that oversight. Across the road is the Michael Starr building, named in honor of a noted politician in Oshawa. He was Oshawa's mayor, and he served as a member of parliament, and he was the first Canadian of Ukrainian descent to be appointed to the federal cabinet. The building was opened in 1983 with Bill Davis, and Michael Starr himself in attendance. Maybe some of you might have been in attendance at the meeting where we had Myron Momrick in, and he did a fantastic talk on the life of Michael Starr. Like, it was a really, really great talk. What is in the slide, the photograph, the monument in the parquet is known as the Day of Mourning Monument. It is dedicated to workers who have died on the job, and this was unveiled in 1996. April 28th is observed as the National Day of Mourning every single year. And this image is from our David Dowsley photograph collection. So at this point in the walking tour, we'd be up along Bond Street, walking across, eventually getting to Simcoe Street, where we walk over to the R.S. McLaughlin Armouries. The Ontario Regiment has seen service in the Fenian Raids, the Northwest Rebellion, and in both World Wars. It is one of the oldest continuing regiments in Canada and one of the senior existing armored regiments in the country. The Ontario Regiment always plays a large role with Oshawa's Remembrance Day commemorations. Not quite sure what it's going to look like for 2020, but I'm sure if you follow them on Facebook, they'll probably let you know what to expect. The Ontario Regiment is based out of the Colonel R.S. McLaughlin Armouries, which is located at 53 Simcoe Street North. The Armouries was built in 1914, and it is a recognized federal heritage building because of its historical associations and its architectural and environmental values. The Armoury was built as part of the Armoury Construction Program initiated by Canadian politician Frederick Borden. Sam Hughes, Minister of the Militia and Defence from 1911 to 1916, accelerated this program due to the threat of the First World War. The Armouries officially opened on May 24, 1914, only a few months before the beginning of World War I. The opening day was a big day for Oshawa, with Sir Sam Hughes in attendance, and the celebrations included a parade through the downtown, which you can actually see if you take a look at the top right image. That image is of that parade through the downtown on the opening day in 1914. When the First World War broke out, the Armoury was used as a training and recruitment center. The Ontario Tank Regiment was stationed in Oshawa during the winter of 1939 to 1940, and during World War II, its headquarters were at the Oshawa Armouries. Some troops were quartered at the Williams Piano Factory, which was located at Richmond Street, the old Joseph Hall Works plant. And like I said earlier, this is now the site to the Durham Region Police Headquarters, and it's just a few streets over from where the Armouries is located at Centre and Richmond. Many people who lived in Oshawa during the war, the Second World War, remembered the long lineups of those waiting to enlist and the buzz of activity around the Armouries. And this is, again, where I usually say, for more information on the history of the regiment, we recommend visiting the Military Museum, which is up by the airport. Again, I'm not quite sure what their protocols are at this time, so if you are wanting to visit them, highly recommend giving them a call, check out their socials. But I will give a plug. My friend went to their drive-through tank Saturdays this past weekend and said it was really great. So if they're holding any more of their drive-through tank events, I've heard it from a source who's been. She says that they're great. And the Four Corners. So like I said, one of my frequent talking points is talking about King and Simcoe. King and Simcoe. We finally arrived at King and Simcoe. It is from this intersection that all streets in Oshawa divide north, south, east, and west. In the mid-1800s, Edwards Gay's popular general store was located on the southeast corner, and across the road was Monroe's Tavern. This tavern is reportedly the site of the only formal duel ever held in Oshawa, and it was between two men arguing over a young woman from Whitby. The Four Corners was also the location of a plane crash. Local historian Thomas Boakley called this event, quote, the most heavily photographed episode in the history of Oshawa, end quote. I also like to say that while Mr. Bulkley was a wonderful local historian, I don't think he could have anticipated the invent of digital cameras. I'm thinking back a couple years ago to that very big Oshawa Generals parade after they won the Memorial Cup, and I know my social media feeds were just flooded with photos. I have a feeling there are other events which might have been more heavily photographed, but nonetheless, this one has certainly captured our interest for over 100 years. The plane crashed on April 22nd, 1918. A woman named Mrs. Guy was injured during the incident, and she was the only injury, which when you think about it, was quite amazing. Thankfully, her injury was minor. She was leaving Porter's Dry Goods at 8 King Street West and was struck on the shoulder by a falling brick. The wings were removed from the plane after the rope securing the fuselage, and the plane was then lowered and slid down piles placed along the building. There were quite a number of these incidents which happened around Oshawa because, as you can imagine, 1918, we're still we're getting towards the end, as we know, hindsight being what it is. We're at the end of World War I, but still, we are in the middle of a major engagement, one of the first where we saw the airs as a battlefield. Planes, this is their first real foray into wars, and there were, because of a couple different flying camps and training camps in Leaside and Long Branch, according to Bulkley, there were several mishaps which happened here in Oshawa. And again, I'm just going to say how great it is to be able to actually have the photographs to show, because it's all well and good when I'm doing the walking tour, but when I'm looking at the TD Bank, it doesn't quite have the same impact as being able to actually see, like, look at that plane. It's just hanging off the side of the building. Like, it's pretty amazing. Just south of this location, at 8 Simcoe Street South, is where the Felt brothers had their original jewelry store. Their business opened in 1886, and while they were still at this location, they were the victims of an exciting incident. There was an armed bandit who held up the store and robbed the clerk of a number of watches. Mr. Felt returned from an early lunch, and he surprised the bandit, and he narrowly escaped being shot. This bandit made a rush for freedom, but was later apprehended by local police officer William Holland, who was also known as Big Bill. I don't know about you folks, but like, that might be one of the top nicknames in Oshawa's history. Big Bill. This incident was recalled in a commemorative issue of the local newspaper in 1924, and I'm very thankful to the Robert McLaughlin Gallery Thomas Bulkley Collection for letting me show the center and the right images, just to give you an idea of the inside and the exterior of the Felt brothers business. Also in the area, on the west side of Simcoe is Mike's Place, a long-standing Oshawa store. It was originally owned by Mike Bulkley, father of Thomas Bulkley. There are stories of when the Gens were in the playoffs and the lineups going from Mike's Place would stretch all the way to Center Street, which I think is just a fun little fact. Also in the area is Drury and Lovell, a long-standing Oshawa and area pharmacy. It was founded in Bowmanville in 1856 and opened in Oshawa in 1903. If you are ever in Bowmanville, they now refer to the Bowmanville Museum simply as Waverly Place, but this was the Drury family's home, and it's been saved as their museum. Also in the area, although it's no longer standing, but it was in the area, was Oshawa's first standalone post office. It was opened in 1907 on the northeast corner of Ontario Street and King Street East. And then while I'm walking and we're going to our next stop, if you're ever in that area, you'll notice on the ground is Oshawa's Walk of Fame. It was established in 2005 with the first inductions in 2006. And our next stop on the walking tour is usually in front of what is now been rebranded again as the Biltmore Theatre, and we're looking across the road to the Regent Theatre. Owned and operated by the Famous Players Canadian Corporation Limited, the Regent Theatre was the first theatre in Oshawa to offer perfect vision for all patrons. Its front is modeled on Georgian architecture, and the entrance lobby and promenade were finished in mahogany. It opened its doors in 1920, and reportedly, the first movies shown were Thomas Meehan in The Prince Chap and a Mack Sennett comedy entitled You Wouldn't Believe It. The biggest hit at the region until 1970 was The Sound of Music, which grossed $75,000 over 6 weeks. The Regent experienced many changes since it first opened. During the 1960s, the seating was cut down to 868 seats to make room for a concession counter and larger lobby. At this time, a new front and marquee were added. In 1989, it closed due to the larger theater complex, which opened in Whitby. Various owners tried to reopen the theater, but unfortunately, it didn't stay open for very long. In 1997, the Regent reopened as a club called the Adrenaline. This venture failed after the owners were forced to adhere to severe liquor law restrictions and were ordered to close for 90 days. The club never reopened. In 1999, there was another attempt to reopen the Regent, this time going back to its roots as a live theater. There was a 5-year lease signed by the Hourglass Theater Productions. The company was preparing to present the Rocky Horror Picture Show when a water pipe burst, spewing 20 feet of water into the theater. They were released from their lease. Not too long after that, March of 2000, talk began of tearing down the Regent. In May, a notice was placed in the local newspaper by Heritage Oshawa, informing the citizens that the city of Oshawa intended to pursue the designation of the Regent as a property of architectural and historical value or interest. In 2001, this designation was put in place. The Regent saw another attempt to reopen as an entertainment venue in the mid to late 2000s, but again, it was not met with success. The Regent Theatre has since been bought by UOIT, or as it's known today, the Ontario Tech University, OnTechU, and this purchase happened in November of 2009. It is used as a lecture hall for students and as a theater during the evenings and on weekends. Since reopening in September 2010, it has been host to many community and cultural events, from the Ontario Philharmonic to rock concerts, and even To Be and Beano, a children's show. The university has endeavored to return it to its motion picture roots, and pre-pandemic, what they were doing was playing classic movies on the first Thursday of every month. Once they're able to return and get those going again, highly recommend. Classic movies, you're sitting in this beautiful theater. I think your popcorn, drink, and a treat comes to just under $10 plus your ticket. Like it's just a delightful evening out. The Regent may be one of the last standing theaters in the downtown, but it certainly wasn't the only theater to exist here. The Marx Theatre once stood at the corner of King and Salina Streets. It was built circa 1875 and was originally operated as the American Hotel. The building changed from a hotel to a theater and had 2 different names before it was renamed the Marx Theatre, and this closed in 1992. Other theaters included the Borsberry Music Hall, the Biltmore and Odeon, and it was now announced in the mid-2020 that it will be returning to its operation as the Biltmore, and the Plazas, which is today Riley's. And also in the area, usually at this point in the walk, we go from the Regent, we go to our next stop, and we are walking by the Genosha Hotel. And I inevitably will always get people asking me, what's going on with the Janosh? What's happening with the Janosh? And even going back 5-6 years ago, it didn't have the best story. It just wasn't looking so great. They have been putting a lot of work. I know pre-pandemic, I'm going to be saying that a lot tonight too, my apologies. There really has been a big push, especially in the last year or so, to get the Genosha restored into its former glory. I think there's talk of having commercial on the bottom units, residential in the upper units. But of note, the Genosha was built in the late 1920s and it opened in 1930. And then as we're walking to our next stop, we usually can catch a glimpse of the Alger building. It was built turn of the century, and it's known as, by most Oshawa residents, as the Alger Press building because Alger Press was established there in the 1940s. UOIT opened it and has been using it for students since 2011, and I think they now just informally refer to it as 61 Charles. But of course, as we're going, our next stop on the walking tour is the Tributes Community Center. It's a fairly newish addition to Oshawa's downtown, especially if you're comparing it to the Regent or the Janosh. The GM Center opened in 2006. Today, it is known as the Tributes Community Center, and it serves as a sports and entertainment facility for Oshawa. A number of events have been held here since it first opened, including a number of post-secondary convocations, Stephen Colbert Day, which was a big day back in, I think it was like 2008? No, 2006 perhaps? It was a big deal back in Oshawa when that happened. Stephen Colbert Day, Oshawa's New Year's Eve celebrations have happened here, as well as a number of concerts. Some big name draws include the Tragically Hip, Bare Naked Ladies, Elton John, Sarah McLaughlin, Selena Gomez, Bob Dylan, and infamously, Kiss. And I say infamously because of the circumstances that brought the band to our city. In 2009, Kiss asked their fans to go to the website and vote for your hometown to be included in the band's next big tour. There was a big push at the time. I remember everyone was encouraging everyone to get out and vote, 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 vote. We want Kiss to come to Oshawa. And sure enough, we finished first among all of the cities. But when Kiss announced their list of concert dates, Oshawa was not included as a venue for their Kiss Alive 35 tour. There was an outcry, and after it, Kiss corrected this oversight and added Oshawa to the schedule, playing a show to over 6,000 fans. The Tributes Community Center is also home to the Oshawa Generals. The Oshawa Generals are named after General Motors, who sponsored their 1937-1938 season. Oshawa had been home to an amateur hockey team for decades before that, and our debut in the Ontario Hockey League was in the 1908-1909 season as the Oshawa Shamrocks. The Jennies have had a number of noted players as part of their roster through their 100-year history, including Alex Delvecchio, Red Tilson, John Tavares, Eric Lindros, Rick Middleton, Dave Andrzejczyk, Ted Lindsay, Mike Craig, Mark Savard, and Oshawa's favorite, Bobby Orr. Although this list could go on and on and on. The Generals have won the Memorial Cup a record 5 times. This is a record only beat by the Toronto Murals, and it is a record which is held by active teams. We hold a record 13 OHL championships, which is marked with the J. Ross Robertson Cup, and we won our latest in the 2014-2015 season. And this number is out of date. I haven't had a chance to update it for 2020. However, as of a couple years ago, our 184 graduates to the National Hockey League was second only to the Peterborough Petes, who, if you are a hockey fan, you know that they are our noted rivals on the ice. So while the Tributes Community Center is the Jennies' current home, before then they played at the Bradley Arena and the Oshawa Arena, which was later known as the Hambley Arena, and finally the Oshawa Civic Auditorium. In 1953, there was a fire which destroyed the Hambley Arena, and this dealt a huge blow to local hockey, as the Generals didn't play from that year through until 1962. For 2 years, they played at Maple Leaf Gardens while the Civic was being constructed. The Tributes Community Center is also home to the Oshawa Sports Hall of Fame, honoring the achievements of Oshawa individuals and teams who have attained prominence and distinction in sports, as well as those who have made major contributions to the development of sports in our community. The Hall of Fame features artifacts, memorabilia, and photographs, and it is also home to the Red Tilson Trophy. This trophy is named after an Oshawa general who was killed in action during World War II and it's awarded to the OHL's most valuable player for the season. And the sculpture out front. So as I said at the beginning of the presentation, the RMG has got public art all around their building, and within the last few years, they've extended their collection to different locations around the downtown, and this is one of them. So this sculpture out front of the center is called Reverb, and it's by artist Noel Harding, and it is part of the collection of the RMG. The sculpture is an impactful, standing at 19 feet high. The curved form implies a megaphone and an amphitheater, my apologies, amphitheater and stage, a net, or a goal, as Reverb reflects the activities that occur inside the Tribute Community Center. The blurb, you can kind of see the cutouts are meant to look like speech bubbles, and they represent the fans and are positioned at like a rake of seats. There's a microphone, interestingly. There is a microphone positioned above center ice inside the center, and it will transmit a signal to the lights within the steel structure. And when it sends that signal, is if you're being super loud inside, the lights are going to reflect on the sculpture outside. So I think that's awesome. You could just be driving by, you could see the lights going crazy on this sculpture, and you must know that there's a lot of activity happening inside the center. It's full of meaning and references. The laser cut stainless steel references the industrial production, and the facets align Oshawa's history as a port city and an industrial capital. I think another point of this sculpture was intended to be a meeting place. So you're outside of the center. It's certainly a gathering place. And as you can kind of see in some of the photos, it's just fun to be silly and take photos around it. It's just fun. And usually much earlier in the walk, I'm asked a question about the murals, to which I say to the participants, please remember that question. I'm going to circle back to it. There are many murals around the downtown area, and they came about as a result of the Downtown Action Committee of 1993. Their mandate was to coordinate improvements to the downtown area, and one of their first endeavors were the murals. They felt that the murals would beautify the downtown, add interest, and instill civic pride. 5 murals were completed by 1995, with additional murals completed in 1997. There are currently a total of 19 murals around Oshawa, and at one point, there was even a moving mural, which was painted on the side of a 1977 Oshawa transit bus. It was parked for many years at the bus depot at Farewell Street and Raleigh Avenue, although it is no longer there. Topics of the murals include music, General Motors, nursing, Camp X, and the Ontario Regiment. And I'm sure you can't imagine why we choose this particular mural to stop and chat about. Not only is it conveniently located on our route, but I'm kind of biased as to the topic that's being portrayed within it. This mural is entitled Lakeshore Park at the Turn of the Century. It was completed in 1997 by Oshawa artist Tony Johnson. It features the Argyle, a steamship which ran in the early 1900s between Toronto and Coburg, and it made stops in Whitby, Oshawa, and Bowmanville. Near the top left is Barnhart's, a popular pavilion located where the beach parking lot is now located. The mural also features the Ocean Wave, a popular beach ride, and 2 of our museum buildings, Robinson House and Henry House. When creating this image, Johnson referred to pictures from the Thomas Bulkley collection, striving for authenticity. And it's currently on the side of the building, which is occupied by Brew Wizards, which is Board Game Cafe. Highly recommend their coffee. That's another thing. A lot of the time during this tour, we're walking around and I'm telling everyone where they need to go for a grab a bite. You know, grab your coffee from Brew Wizards, then go back to Pizza Muno, grab a slice. It's going to be a great afternoon. We talk a lot about food on this tour. It's wonderful. The Simcoe Street United Church. This has been a fixture in our downtown since 1867, the year of Confederation. It started as a small Bible class of 9 members, whose first wooden building boasted an orchestra of 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, a flute, and a bass violin. In June of 1867, the cornerstone was laid. 11 months later, in May of 1868, the Simcoe Street Methodist Church was ready for dedication. The Reverend Dr. Egerton Ryerson, Chief Superintendent of Education of Ontario, delivered the morning service. The Reverend Dr. Wellington Jeffers delivered the afternoon service, and a large number of other ministers were present at the altar, and the audiences for both services were large and filled most of the aisles. The evening sermon was by the Reverend W. Morley Punchin, and he was described as the most eloquent man of Methodism. He attracted such vast crowds that the service was held at the Reverend Dr. Thornton's church across the street. The Methodist church was described as both neat and beautiful and cost $15,000 to build. It could accommodate between 700 and 800 people. Between 1911 and 1915, the church was completely renovated. The choir area was enlarged, new pews were added, and a new heating system was installed. A new Sunday school building was built in 1913. However, not long after this expansion, in November of 1919, the church faced a fire, and it was believed to have been caused by the organ, and it destroyed the Sunday school building and part of the sanctuary. The building was restored after the fire and renovations at a cost of $75,000. While repairs were happening, church services were still held, but they were held over at the Marks Theatre. So the picture on the on the left was taken at a previous downtown walking tour. We did that in partnership with Jane's Walk, and the church was lovely enough to open their doors for our participants. It was a bit of a cold May afternoon, so I'm not sure about everybody else on the tour, but I, for one, was happy for a few minutes inside the church so that I could get a little bit of feeling back in my very cold fingers. And the Reverend was kind enough to deliver the history of the church, which was quite nice as well. And then the picture on the right, I believe I took at one of the previous Doors Open Oshawa. So if you haven't been inside this church, it really is a beautiful, it's just inside is stunning. In 1925, the United Church of Canada came into building. The Simcoe Street Methodist Church was renamed the Simcoe Street United Church. A little bit about the early history of religion in our community. In the early days, Oshawa and surrounding area were sparsely settled and surrounded by dense forests, making it difficult to build churches in the area until there was more of a settlement. The religious needs of people who first came to the area were met by traveling preachers who were very earnest and devout men with great religious zeal. These ministers would travel from district to district along the lakeshore, holding services in homes of people, and if by chance a school had been built, they would preach in the small schoolhouses. The first church in the area was built by the Presbyterians at Highway 2 and Kendallwood Road in Whitby. The church is no longer standing, but there is a plaque and cairn there to commemorate the site, and this was the church of Reverend Thornton. Samuel Pedlar, around the turn of the century, put together an unpublished manuscript of the history of Oshawa, and he discusses the history of 6 churches in Oshawa, although there likely would have been more. In the 1928 Oshawa Handbook, it mentions the city having 15 churches of all denominations, and today Oshawa boasts over 40 different places of worship, a whole slew of different denominations. Also in the area, across the road is the Oshawa Community Church, known as St. Andrew's United until 1999, and the building itself was constructed in 1899. And unfortunately, I forgot to include a photograph of them, but also in the area as we're walking to our next stop, I always point out the Canadian Automotive Museum, another museum friend of ours in the area. And I believe they are still hosting walking tours themselves. I believe, please check out their Facebook page in case I'm wrong. I believe they're hosting in-person downtown walking tours. You have to pre-book in advance. And their downtown walking tours take the automotive perspective. So particularly, they're looking at the history of the area and how it relates to Oshawa's automotive history. But of course, we're walking south along Simcoe Street to our next stop, which is Memorial Park. After World War I, Oshawa, like many other communities, wanted to create a war memorial. The space that Memorial Park currently occupies was originally home to the St. George's Church and then the Peddler people. Peddlers sold the land to the town shortly after they moved their factories to Simcoe Street South, and St. George's Church was demolished in 1924 when they built the larger church, which was we talked about as we finished up around Civic Center. Much of the credit to the War Memorial is owed to a man named Dr. T.E. Kaiser. He was instrumental in fundraising, letter writing, and with the selection of the final design, which he chose using pictures of other war memorials from around the world. The War Memorial in Oshawa is modeled after one in Evesham, England, and was sculpted by Alfred Howell. The memorial was unveiled on November 11, 1924, by Sir William Mulock, Chief Justice of Ontario, along with 4 women who had lost their sons in World War I. The ceremony included speeches by prominent citizens and all of the military units of the city. On top of the memorial, there is a bronze figure of an infantryman. Every Allied country of World War I is represented by a stone placed out front of the memorial. There are stones from countries such as England, France, Russia, and Japan, as well as stones from battlefields where Canadians lost their lives. And I do believe they have updated the memorial through the years, as if you're there, you can see a stone from Afghanistan included. So they have kept certain aspects up to reflect any Oshawa citizens who have passed away because of war, died during because of war. As well, on either side of the memorial, there are lights that burn at all times. Bronze tablets are inscribed with the names of 138 local men and women who died during World War I. In 1948, another tablet was added with the names of 177 Oshawa residents who died during World War II, and those who died during the Korean War have also been recognized. The inscription, Garden of the Unforgotten, was suggested by Josephine Kaiser, who was Dr. Kaiser's daughter. One unique feature of the memorial, which I think is really quite interesting, is the time capsule that's buried beneath it. There reportedly is a copper box which was buried there in 1924, and it was just somehow forgotten about. I was going through our archival folders and I stumbled across a couple newspaper articles from many, many years later. And there was this individual who was there at the unveiling, and he said, I remember there was a time capsule. Where can I find out this information? So they put this time capsule there and completely forgot about it. There's no plaque to mark it, nothing like that, but they ended up finding out a little bit of information about it. This is what they've learned. This time capsule is to be opened in 2424. That's right, they put a 500-year lifespan on this time capsule. And it contains artifacts such as a letter from the city engineer, newspapers, photos, catalogs, stamps, coins, and poppy seeds, which, of course, as we all know, is a symbol of World War I. It also contains a check of an unknown amount from the mayor in 1924 to whoever the mayor is going to be in 2424 to replace the memorial. I don't know, but I would feel like it might be a little stale dated by then. We'll see what happens. There is a memory wall at the cenotaph, which was unveiled in 2006. Memorial Park prominently features the War Memorial, which, as I said, was unveiled in 1924, as well as the McLaughlin Bandshell, which opened in 1942. Amazing acoustics. If ever you've had a chance to see any of the concerts of the park, amazing acoustics there. And across the road from Memorial Park is the EA Level School. Evidence of schools and education in the early 19th century Ontario is rare. However, it is safe to assume that early education in Oshawa was likely the same as everywhere else. A child's primary education began in the home, where the girls were, quote, educated in sewing, knitting, spinning, bread making, and other household chores by their mothers. The boys, when old enough, frequently learned the occupations of their father, end quote. Exactly where and when the first school in the area opened is a bit of a matter of debate, although it's agreed that it was somewhere around the lakeshore and it opened sometime around 1812. We have one account which says that Joseph Moore, a settler from Boston, established the first school, quote, on the farm of Ben Rogers. But there's another source that says, quote, in 1811, the first school on the lakeshore was built. The first school on the lakeshore between Oshawa and Whitby was established by Miss Cross in a log hut on a farm later owned by William Blair, end quote. So like I said, we don't know exactly where, but somewhere along the lakeshore and sometime around 1812. Many teachers were United Empire Loyalists who had once defected to Upper Canada after the Revolutionary War. They were strict and taught in log cabins or one-room schoolhouses. Only one source of heat would have been in the building, and that was a wood stove right in the middle of the room, while, quote, the desks were arranged in long rows about the room. In the front of the desk was an equally long seat. Each pupil, when not engaged in study, was compelled to pass the time by giving a long, cold look at the blank wall, end quote. The first log schoolhouse in Oshawa proper, so the area around the downtown that we've toured through today, it was built in 1829 on the southwest corner of, you guessed it, King and Simcoe Streets. This is where the CIBC was located and then became, I believe, Munro's Hotel. Its first two teachers were Andrew Masson and Fanny Hall, who was the first lady teacher. Eventually, just after Oshawa was incorporated as a village, the Center Street School was opened, and it is located where the EA level school is today. The site was purchased for $75, and a one-room story building was built in 1856, costing $1,000. This was a union school. It was multi-denominational and served as both elementary and high school. It went through a number of phases, most notably when the new high school was built on Simcoe North in 1910, which today we know as O'Neill, and this left the entire Central School, or the Center Street School, for elementary departments. Now, as you can kind of see in the pictures, the building which is currently there was not the original school. The original school went through a number of additions, and around 1920, it suffered a disastrous fire. A new building was opened at this site in 1924. It was renamed in 1956 to EA Level after Edwin Arthur Level, an outstanding and respected member of the Board of Education and, yes, of the same levels of Level Drugs. This building now serves as a continuing education center for the Durham School Board. And our final stop on the walking tour, if you can think back to one of those very first slides, we go in one big giant circle. And if you're familiar with the downtown, the Masonic Hall is just across the street from the library, which is our very first stop. So the Lebanon Lodge received its charter in 1861. At that time, the meetings were being held at the Sons of Temperance Hall on Simcoe South, and that building no longer exists. Around 1864 or 1865, the meetings were being held in the Corinthian Lodge, which was located at 6 King East. In 1872, the lodge changed from the Corinthian Hall over to the Western Bank that stood at the northwest corner of King and Simcoe. And then in 1890, they moved to 1 Simcoe South. The question of a new Masonic Hall was again being raised around 1927. And this is when Dr. T.E. Kaiser submitted a proposition which involved turning over a piece of property on King East to the Temple Company and selling enough stock to finance the building of this new Masonic Hall. The King Street location was not chosen, but instead, land was purchased on the northeast corner of Center and Metcalfe Streets. And this site was celebrated because it, quote, paid tribute to the beautiful war memorial within sight of the new temple. An initial $5,000 was advanced for the purchase of the site by the very worshipful brother R.S. McLaughlin. But please note, it was advanced and it was paid back to R.S. McLaughlin as a loan. In 1928, the cornerstone of the new Masonic temple was laid. The construction contract was awarded to the J.W. Trick Company. The local newspaper boasted, quote, when completed, the temple will be one of the finest of its kind in the province and a splendid addition to the beautiful buildings of the city. The building was completed and the lodge room dedicated in 1929. Approximately 500 Masons were in attendance when the lodge was opened. Freemasonry is one of the oldest and largest worldwide fraternities dedicated to the brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of a supreme being. And I believe I took that from one of the various Mason websites out there. Although of a religious nature, Freemasonry is not a religion. It urges its members, however, to be faithful and devoted to their own religious beliefs. And a little bit of a look inside the Masonic Hall. Freemasonry is well known for its use of symbolism and tradition, and this is found in the fraternity itself, as well as in their buildings. And the Oshawa Masonic Temple is no exception to this. There are symbols all over the buildings, which are very representative of Masons, which include the square and compass, which you can see if you take a look at the chair, you can see that very iconic Mason symbol. And that is above the door of the Freemason Hall. Both the square and compass are architect's tools and are used in Masonic rituals as emblems to teach symbolic lessons. As measuring instruments, the tools represent judgment and discernment. And typically you will see a letter G right in the center of that square and compass. And the most widely accepted interpretation of the G is that it stands for God, to remind Masons that God is at the center of Freemasonry. The Masonic Temple was built with the intention of being both a meeting place for Masons as well as a community meeting place. Inside the temple, there are Masonic quarters, an anteroom, lodge rooms, and a regalia room, as well as a banquet hall, auditorium, and projection room. And please, I apologize for the somewhat blurry photos. I took those back in 2014 when my cell camera wasn't nearly as good as it is today. But I took those photos when I was able to get inside the Masonic Hall during one of Oshawa's Doors Open events. And if we're able to ever safely have the doors open again, this is another event that during the downtown walking tours, I'm always encouraging our participants to be aware of and take part in, because that's when you get to actually go inside a lot of these buildings that I've talked about on this downtown walking tour. It's always a treat when the Masons are included, because being able to see inside the Masonic Hall is always really quite interesting. So with that, as I said, our walking tour is one big loop. We've finished, and it's at this point that I always thank my participants, thank my walkers for going on the walk of the downtown walking tour. I'm going to thank you all so much for listening. And at this point, I'm going to figure out how to stop sharing my screen. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm going to turn my video back on so you folks can see me. Hello, hi. So I'm just going to quickly go through the comments, because I do see that there have been one of the first questions that I see in the comments. Do they still add names to the Walk of Fame? Who was the latest added? Great question, Ted. Thank you.
Seem like it.
It's been a while. I think that they have had fairly recent inductees within the last 5 years or so, but who the latest were, I don't know off the top of my head. That's definitely something that I can jot down and see if we've got any info in the archives. I know that they hold induction ceremonies, but how often they're held, I'm not quite sure. Oh, and sorry, Jill also jumped on and answered the question during the talk, saying that it was run by the Rotary Club and that there's not much new info on the inductions. Thanks, Jill. Slash Laura. Janet, thank you so much for also adding that there is a GoFundMe page for the steeple restoration. Again, if you've driven up Simcoe Street, you will have seen all of the scaffolding around Simcoe Street United. Yeah, it's going through some work, and if you're able to support that project, I'm sure the church would be very grateful for that. What is the oldest standing building in downtown Oshawa? If I'd have to pick one of them, the one that I know off the top of my head would be the Oshawa House. That one was built around 1838. Definitely the oldest that we talked about on the walk. If there are any houses around downtown that are older, that I don't quite know. I know that Oshawa, quite a number of the buildings have been removed in the name of progress. I'm thinking of, for example, the post office came down, and that was a beautiful building. The town hall came down. But the Oshawa House is still standing. And it's nice to see that it's still thriving with some really great tenants in there. Thank you for those questions. Are there any other questions? I should add the Automotive Museum to the tour. Usually I do a little bit of a spiel. They're not a particular stop because I put more of the emphasis on the Memorial Park, and they just happen to be across the road. But yeah, certainly that building does have a really great history, being an early pharmacy, being the early OMS, and then of course being the Automotive Museum as it is today, which is why the second floor can handle the weight of all of those cars. It's because it was originally built as a dealership to handle. And I believe they have an elevator on the inside, which allows them to move the cars up and down, which again is another holdover from its dealership days. Where is a good place to research about the history of a property? Believe it or not, this is one of Jen's most highly requested questions. It used to be, do you have photos of a building? But now it's, or genealogy, how do I research my family? But now it's, how do I research the history of my property? And it was asked of Jen so often that we've actually developed a booklet. So if you were to go to oshawahistoricalsociety.org / I'll have to find the link because I don't know it off the top of my head. But however, on that website, there is a link where we've got this booklet. We say one of the best places, and this booklet's great. It's got steps and where to go and how to research. Our archives is great in that it has got we've got donations and collections, but we are reliant upon those donations. So if people haven't donated information, we're just not going to have it. So, and yeah, this booklet provides you all of those different steps on where to go and how to find it. Is it under? Bear with me for just, yes, here we go. It's oshawamuseum.org/publications, and you scroll about halfway down, go right past all of the annual reports, and you'll find the link to the booklet. Some of the links are a little bit outdated as well. For example, the library has changed their city directories. We always highly recommend that. Oh, Derek, thank you so much for putting in that actual link. I appreciate that. Yeah, we've got to update it with some of the newer links as well. Land registry you can access online, as opposed to actually having to physically go to the land registry office, which is a big thing for researchers. So yeah, perfect. That would be the link, and that's the booklet. And if you have any other questions, shoot us an email and we can get you those up-to-date links. Can Heritage Oshawa help as well? So Heritage Oshawa is an advisory committee to the city of Oshawa. So they provide a lot of guidance as to getting houses designated and certainly advocating for heritage in the city. And the booklet, which is linked with that PDF, was developed in partnership with Heritage Oshawa. So that was something that we put together with them on how to research your house. Perfect. Are there any other questions? No? Well then, wonderful. Once again, thank you all so much for spending a Tuesday night with us. I hope you enjoyed this virtual walk. Hopefully one day soon we'll be able to do the walks again in person, because I miss walking around downtown and talking about all the cool things that you can see there. And once again, our next speaker series is going to be on November 17th. We are welcoming our good friend Sonia Jones, and she's going to be talking about art and the stories that they can tell from the Robert McLaughlin collection. Thank you all so much. Happy Tuesday. Stay well, stay safe. If you have questions, reach out to us. Otherwise, have a great night. Good night, everyone.